Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tradesman Talks, where we go in deep on how you can finally launch your trade-based business, or you can continue to grow your existing home service business. And hopefully you get some value out of this. If you have any questions or suggestions on future episodes or previous ones, feel free to send us an email at support@cabinetstartup.com. And with that, how was your week, Wilson?
Good, man. We solved some cool problems this week. One of our one of our techs had an issue with their car, which is not great. And there's like 4 or 5 floating variables that made it a legitimate problem for this person. And so we were able to get creative and found a replacement car for like, I don't know, probably half the price if you actually had to go get one. So it ended up being super affordable. And it was just a really good reminder that when you are committed to solving a problem and get creative about how you can solve the problem, solutions tend to make themselves known to you.
Oh, for sure.
That was nice, and that's going to increase obviously the productivity of the shop a lot. So, the difference between having 3 people able to go out and do work and having 2 people out and doing work is several $1,000s a week, and we want to get money. What about you, man? How was your week?
It was pretty good. Keeping the shops going, getting marketing campaigns back up and running. We were adjusting our Facebook stuff, and so it's been good to get that progress, and working on the construction side of things with the houses. That's going good. I did find out my grandma has breast cancer, so that was a little bit of a lull in the day.
Not good. Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, so we'll be doing what we can to help with that. She's local, so fortunately we got a good amount of people around here to help her with that journey and process.
Yeah. No good way for it to happen, but it is always advantageous to have support of, like, I always feel horrible because there are people out there that experience stuff like that, and they don't have family near them. They don't have a support system around them. It's I guess a blessing, not the best time for their blessing, but still a blessing.
Yeah, we have a pretty localized family over in my hometown where I grew up. So we got some support systems, and we'll help her through it. And fortunately, I mean, it seems to be, that's one of the more common cancers that I think a lot of innovation has taken place with treatments and whatnot. So I'm sure we'll get through it, and she'll be back to normal soon enough.
Yeah, well, she's any bit as determined as you are with everything that you do. I'm sure that she's going to kick it good.
Yeah. Well, today I want to talk about specifically how people who have just started or who are thinking about starting can really build momentum quickly. And as we bring up mindset a lot, a phrase that we spoke about right before starting this podcast is keeping the business simple and starting with simple. And whether you have an existing business or you're starting a new one, you might be faced with a challenge or at least a goal. And you sometimes might find yourself starting over with your approach. And so this very much applies to people new and experienced. And when we talk about starting simple, it can really set the path to solve whatever challenge or to achieve whatever goal you're working towards. And it becomes very easy for people to overcomplicate things and to put too much focus on future steps when they haven't quite built the proper momentum yet to get to that level. For example, with the broad goal of I want to make $1 million a year. Well, if they aren't making any money with their business, then that's a great goal to have, but that shouldn't necessarily be what you're working towards right now. Maybe break that goal down into $100,000 per year or even $10,000 per month, and starting your goal with that can help set the way for you to achieve bigger goals. And when you're focusing on these smaller goals, or I should say specific goals, really diagnosing the primary problem or challenge that can really make the biggest impact, and in a way simplifying the equation enough for you to have some clarity and to have some confidence in your ability to solve it.
One of the things that's really interesting, and again, we say this phrase all the time: simple scales and complex fails. And we've talked about it. I love Cody Sanchez's YouTube, right? I love everything she talks about. One thing she said is, for all the businesses she's managing, right, she has a simple card that they turn in, and it's got 3 things that they check for the business, 5 max. The entire business is represented within these 5 points that she uses as kind of her checklist. But then you see people in their first starting business, they're monitoring 100 things, right? Which is really hard to do. And it's almost impossible to do effectively.
For sure. I would say that it's harder to build and start a business than it is to maintain and manage one, especially as you become experienced and you know how to see through the static, and you have the systems to give you that concise way of making decisions that impact the business the most. Like Cody Sanchez, she has a team and has managers that distill everything back down to her to where she can make the decisions that impact everything else. And when you're first starting off, you don't necessarily have the luxury of a team. You may not even have enough resources to start building a team, and you're kind of left with yourself and the goal. And when we really define what the challenge is and what can move the needle the most, it really becomes kind of taking one step after the other and focusing just as much, if not more, on the present than you may find yourself thinking about the future. You know, there's certainly skills to be developed in your ability to look around the corner in a way. But being able to focus on what's in front of you and accomplishing that goal first and foremost is probably what is most important for people in the phase of building their business. As you build in systems to bring in fuel and resources, then you can focus on allocating and distributing those resources to continue to grow the business and manage the business. And I think a lot of people listening to this call or this conversation are kind of in the first phase where they're doing a lot. As you mentioned, they're managing a bunch of different things. And so, you know, what would you say to someone who has a bunch of things and they're trying to figure out how to break it down into determining what to do next?
So as a rule, and we talk to our students about this pretty regularly, if your business is doing less than $100,000 a month, I think the thing that you should probably be focusing on is revenue generating activity.
Yep.
Yeah, 100%. And even within your daily actions, one of the things we talk about is like, okay, you have 2 needs. You have leads that need to be followed up with, and you have a customer that wants touch-ups. What do you do first? And there are lots of contractors like, I couldn't call leads because I had to go do a touch-up. That touch-up represents a much smaller opportunity than 5 new leads does for me. And more importantly, I can get that done at a lot of flexible times. I don't know why I can't call them while I'm doing a touch-up, right? Right. Looking at that in terms of priority and the correct hierarchy, I think the revenue should always come first. And in that sense, it's making sales the priority. So is it bringing me a lead? Is it bringing me a customer? And if the answer is no, then it would probably move secondary if I have anything else that could be.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. Focusing on things that generate revenue as the top priority is going to set you up to be able to handle other tasks. Because if you have to do a bunch of things in the business, but you have no income, then it's going to dramatically limit what you're able to do for the business outside of generating income. Yep. And so I rather you guys fill up your war chest, as they say, before you go to war. Don't focus on, the wrong things and not have the resources you need to be able to achieve other things or focus on other things in the business. So sales is probably the most important thing for a lot of businesses, but certainly new ones. And that was one way that I was able to build Elite Cabinet Coatings was by focusing on sales pretty much first. Now, I can't say that wholeheartedly because I did have a website. I did have, a way to represent my business. I had a legal structure. Like I actually had a business to point to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and so I would, as a caveat, when I say sales, and maybe like when we built out the CAD system, right? The reason we went with CADs, it's client acquisition, delivery, and scalable systems, right? Client acquisition, in my mind, encompasses marketing and sales. You have to have the marketing portion in place, as well as the ability to sell, because client acquisition is a singular unit. And so maybe I should specify. I mean client acquisition, not just sales. I'm assuming that you have a website. I'm assuming that you have some form of advertising. And by God, I hope that you have an EIN and a bank account and some of those basic things. And if you don't, we have a course for like $50 that has all of that outlined in one spot. Go buy it, right? It will make your life way easier. But yeah, I mean, one of the things when you look at your story, especially Stephen, like you put all of those pieces in place from the very beginning. But and correct me if I'm wrong here, after that, it was pretty much just growth. You didn't go back and change your logo a bunch of times. You weren't, you weren't going back and messing with that stuff. You got it to where it was functional, and then you focused on growth.
Right. I did. Once I had some form of representation, I certainly put most of my energy into sales. And so that meant client acquisition, as you put it, generating leads and calling those leads, converting the leads into appointments, attending the appointments and converting those appointments into actual sales. And because I was collecting deposits in those appointments, it gave me the fuel to then go and buy more tools and get more sample doors. And, soon after I started, bought a work truck. I was using a little car, and I would rent a U-Haul truck. After I messed up my car, I spilled paint all over it, and I couldn't put a ladder in it. And so I ended up just renting a truck for the first couple jobs, and that was fine. I did what I needed to, and I spent as little as possible to get the job done with quality. We don't want to cut corners necessarily, but I wasn't over investing in the beginning. I was focusing on generating revenue. And that, I think, was the best approach. It certainly got me to where I am, but I think if others followed that approach, they would find themselves with more resources to then invest in the business with less stress at the beginning. Because if you can really dial in your client acquisition systems and process, you're a predictable way to generate clients, then you're going to have resources to build out the rest of the business. If you start with the shop space and the work truck and the tools and all of that, you're spending money to do all of that. And so it increases your level of desperation, which inadvertently makes your sales appointments more difficult to convert into sales, because now you're wanting and very much needing to close that sale. And that energy, that tonality is going to bleed into the experience that you're trying to create with the potential customer. And it's going to be interpreted by the homeowner as discomfort. And they're not going to want to hire you because there's just something off. And that offness is your desperation.
It stinks. So, desperation stinks. Nobody likes it. Girls don't like it. Homeowners don't like it. Like it's not a good look for anybody trying to get something. But separate, I guess kind of related. But even if you were so talented that you didn't let the desperation come into your voice and you were expert, ninja level salesperson, you still end up taking crappier jobs, right? Because it's like, yeah, I need money right now. So the job may be below your minimum, or it may have some extra BS attached to it, or you may be willing to lower your prices less than you would. And all of those decisions lead to you having less revenue in the future.
Yeah.
And so, the ability to abstain from building infrastructure that is nice but not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We talk to our students about this all the time. Guys are like, yeah, I found this $3,000 sprayer. Why? Why do you need a $3,000 sprayer?
Well, it's a great deal because I can buy it for 2,000.
Yeah, it's like, okay, but it's just, what's the point? And we hear lists of things people are going to spend money on all the time. It's just, whether or not that has return is the most important thing you can focus on. If you save $2,000 on a sprayer and instead got one for 300, you take the difference of that. That's $1,700. You can drop it to a lead generation system. If you're paying $50 a lead, you're still talking about, I don't know, my math is off, 10 leads, no, 16 leads, 30 leads, 30 freaking leads. So if at $50 a piece, you put $1,800 in, you're talking about 30 leads. That is a lot of potential business. If you close 1 in 10, that's $15,000 in new money versus $2,000 that went away. Right? If you put those two things on a scale, it's like, yeah, it's a no-brainer. I think it is tough though, because when I say, hey, you're going to invest $2,000 for 30 leads, I don't think the average person looks at 30 leads and goes, oh, that's $15,000. A lot of people look at it and go, oh, I spent $2,000. And if they've had a bad experience with a lead generation system in the past, or we laugh all the time about how many people hate Home Advisor, right? Or Thumbtack, or pick your devil evils. What is it they call them?
Pick your poison.
Pick your poison. Yeah. Well, I think the most common term I hear from them is scam artists. They're like, oh yeah, those guys are scam artists. They're like, yes, it's $1 billion scam artist. That makes sense, right? So, when you look at any one of those different platforms, if you've had a bad experience, it's easy for people to look at that as an expense and not an investment. But since it's not something that can be seen or touched, they don't have the feeling that, well, at least I could sell it later, right?
Yeah, I think it's unnatural at the beginning for small business owners to look at everything as a potential return.
Right.
And sometimes that return can be negative. Sometimes that return can be positive. But when you're simplifying your decision process on what kind of return will I get from this expense, and when you're building the business, I don't recommend people look too far. You don't want to look at in terms of today, but you don't want to look at in terms of 5 years.
Right.
A safe kind of period is maybe 3 to 6 months. If I were to just guess, that's a random arbitrary number in a way, but you want to look at kind of short term, medium term, not short term in the terms of days, but not long term in the terms of years. And so will this investment bring a positive return in 3 to 6 months? And what does that return look like? If this investment doesn't pay me back in full and plus profit in 3 to 6 months, it's probably not the best investment for me to make right now. And you have to kind of be open-minded on how that return might come, because people might say, oh, well, I'm going to buy a truck. It's not really going to make me money. Well, the truck will get you to the jobs that produce the profit that pay off the truck, obviously. The sprayer that costs $3,000 versus $300 isn't necessarily going to let you finish the job any faster. Maybe in some equipment will, some equipment won't. That's why I encourage people to be open-minded about how that return will come. But when you're determining if this investment is appropriate or not, ask yourself, what kind of return will this bring me in at least 3 to 6 months? Sometimes the return is super quick. If you don't have a sprayer and you buy a sprayer, that return can come very quick.
Yes.
When it comes with marketing, if you have no form of inbound leads, that investment of $500 for the month can bring you X amount of leads that bring you X amount of jobs, and that could equate to thousands and thousands of dollars. And if you do find yourself investing in something and it doesn't pay you back in 3 to 6 months at the very beginning, then you may want to adjust your budget the following month, or however you are organizing your budget. I hope you guys are looking at it at least monthly. Probably at the beginning you want to look at it a little bit sooner because you don't have as much revenue coming in, so there's not as big of a margin for error at the very beginning.
Well, so yeah, maybe a good way of I guess categorizing that in order is like, okay, the first thing you should look at is one, is this going to increase my revenue? Right? In certain cases, yes versus no. So you using a car in the very beginning, like a truck is not necessarily going to increase your revenue, right? You may decide that you want it for not having damage to your car. But if that's the case, you can say, okay, well, I'm going to set aside a percentage of profits, and then I'm going to buy that when I hit a threshold. So that way it's no longer a function of as an investment. The second thing I think people should ask themselves is this the most efficient solution to the problem I'm solving? Because I could buy a $3,000 sprayer or I could buy a $300 sprayer. And if I'm talented enough to make a $300 sprayer look like a $3,000 sprayer, and it takes me 2 extra hours a week, that's going to be worth it for the money I can put there. Or, my favorite example, painting contractors with a, Chevy 2500 or 3500, like, do you need a truck that big? And you need a new truck to get you to your job site? Because for 99% of us, the answer is no. And so, is it going to bring revenue? Two, is the most efficient path to bring in revenue. And I think if you can answer both of those two questions pretty solidly, you have at least a good framework for how to make that decision, which is the most important thing, in my opinion. Because you do this is a skill that you have, and part of it's probably from experience, but you've made enough of these decisions that you have good frameworks. Like if you read business books like Traction, one of the things they talk about is everything's part of a 10-year plan, right? But the only thing you're focused on is 3-month segments. And you review those every 3 months, but going past that a lot of times doesn't make sense because, one, we don't think really that far ahead that well. And two, if you're looking 60 feet ahead, you're likely to trip over what's right in front of you.
Right.
That doesn't help anybody.
But, to double click on what we've mentioned, focusing on revenue producing tasks and investments. So, before you even contemplate equipment and tools and a vehicle that's certainly will support the fulfillment side of the business, really encourage you guys to focus on marketing and sales. And sometimes marketing doesn't require a bunch of money. It requires time. We have talked about the immense value of creating a referral network where the customers that other vendors are serving are the exact same demographic that you would be serving. And you can incentivize these other vendors. And what I mean by vendors are, if, with me and Wilson being in the cabinet business, similar vendors can be countertop companies, interior designers, house painters, flooring companies. You want to speak with other professionals that serve the same customer and incentivize them to refer you. So if you're a window installer, maybe you go to the door companies, you go to the remodelers, you go to the general contractors, the developers, the real estate brokers. If you're a countertop company, you go to the cabinet companies, you go to the interior designers, you go to the remodelers as well. You go to the professionals that serve the same customer, and you can quite literally create a team of salespeople that you don't have to pay salaries to, or you don't have to pay ongoing costs. You should, give them a incentive, a small sliver of the pie that they can help bring into your business. I always encourage that. But you're only paying for what's coming in. And that could be huge value. And you can meet these people, you can form these relationships and have discussions with them for no money. Right. It requires time, and you can create that network in as little as a couple of weeks. If you really devoted consistency throughout those 2 weeks, you can create a referral network.
For people willing to hustle, and we've seen this with our own partners, dude, you can go knock on doors, right? Yeah. There's a legitimate shortage of contractors. If you go knock on 300 doors, your odds of finding 1 or 2 customers is really high. So you can go out and spend 1 to 2 Saturdays and book up a whole month. We actually had a guy recently that, I think he went through like our original course from like 3 years ago, paid $1,500, didn't even get direct coaching from us, and built a $30,000 business a month $30,000 a month business. We're like, well, what are you doing for marketing? He's like, oh, I just knock on doors. That's all he does.
Yeah, that is heavily underrated now. Some of these what might be described as old school forms of client acquisition, no one is doing it anymore. And back in the, the 70s, everyone was doing it. And there is a reason that roofing companies, their number one client acquisition method is door knocking. And for some reason, a lot of other home services have drifted away from that type of acquisition. But roofing companies, I know, still go really strong as a way to generate customers. They simply knock on doors, and we certainly have had people in our community do that for cabinet refinishing. We've had people do that for epoxy flooring. It's homeowners. Your customer are homeowners, so it's easy to find them. They're all in the neighborhoods, and so if you don't have a ton of money to put into marketing, spend a couple days on the weekend every week, and you can easily knock on 300-400 doors. It sounds like a lot, but I promise you could do that in a day.
Pretty fast.
And out of the 400,
you
can schedule a few appointments.
We had a guy do that. He wouldn't even knock on the doors, right? He literally just took flyers and taped them to the doorknob, which, by the way, pro tip, if you guys actually go do this, do not tape the flyer to the door. That is a horrible idea. Tape it to the doorknob. Your wallet will thank me. That's why you get paid big bucks, right? But he literally just went and taped them to doorknobs, and he would get business like that. It's what you're doing is
consistently too. It was every time he did it, he got at least one.
Every time he did it, yeah. So $3,000 for every time he went out and did that. He did about 2 hours. So if you do the math, it's a pretty high return on investment. And I think the reason I like that option as well is it's like, look, there are a lot of free options for people to go out and get customers if they're willing to actually go put in the work. But it's a matter of the focus. I've seen guys who are like, oh yeah, what are you doing? I'm designing my logo some more. Like, you already have one? Like, yeah. I'm like, but you don't have any customers? Like, no, I'm trying to make use of my time. Like, good, go knock on doors. You'd be better off standing in front of a grocery store and handing your cards out to random people than sitting in your office by yourself. And that's got to be the mentality. I think Mark Cuban said, the part of the reason he's been so successful is because he was good at sales, right?
Right. And cold calling works too, still. If you're a window installer and you call every remodeler or every real estate broker in your town, you are going to get customers. It's a guarantee. If you're a cabinet refinisher, a cabinet painter, a high-end finisher, if you call every interior designer in your county, you will get customers. It's a guarantee. But people don't want to do these things. It sounds too simple. It sounds too good to be true. When everyone goes left, people go right. And they think they have to. Now everyone's online. And so the natural instinct is to think you have to do online advertising. And yes, online advertising works, but so do these more simple forms of advertising. And, online advertising, of course, costs money. And for those who are just getting started and may not have a lot of liquidity, and even if you do, I still encourage you to devote some time on the ground, boots on the ground approach, and build out your referral network. Go knock on some doors. You will get customers. It's a guarantee, especially if you do it consistently, a couple days a week. You will get customers, and it's a very simple way to start that ball rolling.
Yeah, one thing I would say, especially people that are starting new, because one of the things that can be really frustrating is like, the first decision is, okay, my number one priority has to be client acquisition, right? And not delivery or systems. You want to have your basic things in place, but your number one thing needs to be getting clients. The second part is, picking a few things, because you're going to end up testing, right? I know for a fact that there are things that work really well in our market that may not be as great in necessarily your market, Stephen, or, like way up in the Northeast. They're going to have a harder time door knocking in December than we do in Austin, Texas, because there's 25 feet of snow on the ground and we don't get snow, right? And so there are going to be variations between those markets, but you're going to have to test those in each market and have an inkling of what's going to work best. So pick something and test it for 3 months. Test it for 1 month, but pick a time, give yourself a time and give yourself an actual KPI for it. I'm going to knock on 1,000 doors. see how many customers I get. Okay, I'm gonna send out 1,000 flyers, see how many customers I get. All right, I'm gonna post twice a week on social media for 2 months, see how many customers I get, and actually test it. And you'll be able to find a niche within your market that works really well. And then you can expand on that once it's effective.
Right. That's a great point. Rather than creating that as a moment of contention or trying to contemplate, what's the best approach to get leads, back to the theme of keeping it simple, just pick one. And as you mentioned, test it and track it. Wilson used the term KPI. That simply means key performance indicator. It's a specific number that you're looking at as a way of determining if it's successful or not. So when you're mailing flyers, a KPI could be how many phone calls you got in return from your flyers. If it's knocking on doors, your KPI could be how many people you actually spoke with. And so you're looking for that number that dictates whether that approach works or not. And so just having that in mind can help you understand if this is a good approach. If you're not getting any phone calls or no one's calling you back or answering the door, then it may not be the best approach. But if it is December in the north and it's snowing, then don't do door knocking, but mail flyers or go to all the local businesses and try that way. Just try different things and adjust as needed, but just keep it simple by picking one and go to work.
Yep. Yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated. And I think that's one of the things is when people are first starting, they make it overly complicated. And that either leads to no action happening at all, or it leads to action happening irregularly enough that nothing can actually get traction and start moving.
Well, it's kind of like the phrase, you find what you look for. One thing you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation was looking for solutions. And as you talked about with the vehicle situation at your shop in Texas, you guys were very solution oriented. So that means you were looking for solutions. You weren't defending the problem. You weren't looking for reasons why your problem is an existential thing that no one can solve. And sometimes I think that's how people start the path of overcomplicating things, is because they are not actually starting from a point of being solution oriented. They're starting from a point of defending the problem. And sure, if we can all find ways to agree with you on how your problem really is a problem. But what is also true is that with enough concentration and open-mindedness, you can also find ways to agree that the problem is solvable.
Yep.
And it's simply just a better use of your time to focus on looking for evidence that point to a solution rather than looking for evidence that point to the problem. If you're having a challenge or some hesitation or resistance, then the problem is apparent. There is no need to investigate further on how the problem is a real problem. Just focus on the solution and investigate a potential solution. And as we've talked about several times in previous episodes, whatever you're trying to solve, whether in your business, whether you're in any trade, it doesn't really matter nowadays. There's so much information online. If you can define the problem, the solution exists. You can simply start Googling your specific problem. But if you're overcomplicating, or in other words, defending the problem, then it becomes very hard to find a solution, because there's so much noise around problems. If you try to Google your problem, sure, you might sift through all of the information and articles and blogs and might find a solution. But if you Google the potential solution, then you're likely to find it.
Yep.
So to be less vague, we bring this back to sales. You can, instead of Googling, why can't I get leads for my roofing business, you can Google, how do I generate leads for my roofing business? Just flip the coin. It's as simple as that. If your challenge is even deeper, how do I generate leads by knocking on doors for my roofing business? Or how do I generate leads for my painting business on Facebook? Or how do I generate leads for my flooring company with direct mail? you see, the more defined you get with the problem, and you can really distill that into a solution orientation,
Yep.
then you're likely to be met with the solution. But if you're overcomplicating it and you're creating more noise for yourself or reasons not to move forward, then it's just going to hold you back.
Yeah. Dude, as a caveat to that, sometimes I see people get attached to their problems, like they almost like identify with it. And
Yeah.
and it's almost like a problem becomes a badge of honor. They're like, yeah, it's just, hard to find good work, or, it's just hard to get good leads. Everybody's tire kickers. And if you start becoming attached to an actual problem, you can pigeonhole yourself into a world of misery for no particular reason. And it doesn't actually serve you, but it's like people wear it as a badge of honor. Like, I work harder than everybody else. Like, working hard is great, but working harder, if you're accomplishing the same thing, is not great, nor is it something to be proud of. And so, if you find yourself experiencing the same problem again and again and again, and talking about that same problem again and again and again, you might ask yourself, like, have I formed a relationship with this problem? Are we codependent? And if so, break up with it, push it away, and solve it. Because having an identity based around a problem that you're facing doesn't serve you, your business, or your customers.
Yeah, and it really is the best path for self-sufficiency. Being able to recognize the problem and being able to take responsibility for finding and bringing in the solution is how you'll get to the next level. And it's how you'll learn lessons and become just a much more self-sufficient person. As you say that, it kind of sparks the thought of almost their problem being my solution in some ways. As you know, we're flipping some houses, and in some ways it could be challenging to find good contractors or even available contractors.
Yeah.
But the ones I do find, their problem, they have themselves convinced that it's hard to find work. It's hard to find consistent work. And then from my perspective, it's like, how can you even say that? Because you have thousands of people like me begging for people like you. But it kind of goes to show, like, the perspective on things can really dictate the experience. And because they believe finding work is hard, they don't even put in effort into finding work. They just accept that label. As you mentioned, they kind of identify with that problem. They pigeonhole themselves into that situation to where they're not advertising. They're not going and meeting remodelers that desperately need them, and in a way that kind of helps me because I am self-sufficient and resourceful enough to find them.
Yep.
and be there saving grace in a way. And it, unfortunately for them, it means I get my problem solved for a lot less money.
Oh,
because
100%.
I can have this house remodeled. I can have this house remodeled and spend 3 times as much if I choose to hire the guy that's recognized the problem and has solved his own problems. But I mean, now I'm the type of person too, these people that I'm bringing, I'm like, listen, let's think about the big picture here. If you come in and work with me, then we build a team, and now you can be more of a foreman, and now you can work on multiple projects that we have going on. And I'll start giving you percentage of the resale prices, and that's how you can make more money. And you need to evolve into a leader, and I can help you do that. And so, people's perspective can really pigeonhole themselves. And so if you really just simplify your goals and you focus on the solution and you take action on the simplest experiment, the simplest potential solution, test it. And if it works, keep doing it. And if it doesn't work, try something else and focus on bringing fuel, or in other words, revenue, to your business so that you then can afford to test other solutions. You can afford to bring in other resources into your business. And over time, your business will evolve and your foundation will develop, and you'll find yourself working on higher and higher level problems. But because you have built that foundation and you built the systems to bring in the revenue, now you're able to bring in a team. And so you, as the owner, are not having to work on the same problem over and over with a different solution. You're now in that point of management. And kind of tying back to you bringing up Cody Sanchez, who is, for those who don't know her, she's an investor. And so now she has the resources, she has the systems she has the people to distill the businesses into hyper simple problems and solutions, and she just kind of navigates things, and it's achievable for everyone. But if you just, as kind of a summary, take your goal, summarize it into simple challenges, find simple solutions, and just go to work.
And make sure your first goal is money.
Yes.
Revenue. Focus on revenue. The fuel, a car doesn't need new headlights if it doesn't have gas. So, speaking of, we have another vehicle that we need to hop onto. So you know the words.
Yeah, well, really appreciate you guys spending some time with us. I hope that brought some value to you. If you have any questions at all, regardless of the trade you're in, feel free to send us an email at support@cabinetstartup.com. We'd be happy to give you some guidance and clarity. And with that said, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Have a good one.
Bye, everybody.